Hello again, everyone. Thank you again so much for your patience. It's wonderful to have you here for today's conversation with Edgar Meyer and Jonathan Morton of the Scottish Ensemble. Before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to thank our partner, the Lifelong Learning Institute here at Virginia Tech. We've been great beneficiaries of that collaboration over the years, and I'd like to say special thanks to Pat Heyer, who's the programming committee chair of that organization, as well as our moderator today, Alan Weinstein, associate professor in the School of Performing Arts. And lastly, of course, to our guests, Edgar Meyer and Jonathan Morton, for making time for this conversation during their visit to Blacksburg. Speaking of this, our special guests, of course, if you haven't yet purchased tickets for tonight's performance, I highly recommend you do so. It's a very rich program featuring works by Bach, Caroline Shaw, and of course, our guest, Edgar Meyer, a brand new piece created just 1 month ago, or I should say finished just 1 month ago. You don't want to miss this program. Last, I know our time is a little bit shorter, so I'll keep the introductions brief. I'd like to take a moment to introduce our guests, of course. First, on the my far left-hand side, your far right-hand side is Jonathan Morton, who is the artistic director of the Scottish Ensemble, which is the UK's leading string orchestra. Mr. Morton is known as something of a musical omnivore and expansive collaborator, as under his tenure, the Scottish Ensemble has been working with acclaimed artists in theater, visual arts, and dance, as well as maintaining a diverse repertoire for the ensemble independently. As a musician, he's principal first violin at the London Sinfonietta, member of the Colin Currie Group, and a frequent contributor to TV and film soundtracks. Lastly, Mr. Morton has served as guest leader and instructor at several eminent ensembles and institutions, such as the Orchestre de Chambre de Paris, the Royal College of Music, and University of Auckland, to name a few. Directly to Mr. Morton's right is our guest, Edgar Meyer, who is a composer and true virtuoso performer on the double bass, who's been to Blacksburg before. It's hard to overstate his extensive accomplishments as well, which include being the only bassist ever awarded the Avery Fisher Prize, as well as the MacArthur Award and 5 Grammys. As a composer, his music's been premiered and recorded by artists we've similarly been fortunate to present here on the Anne and Ellen Fife Theater stage, including Emmanuel Axe, Joshua Bell, Yo-Yo Ma, and Zakir Hussain, to name a few. Some of Mr. Meyer's most recent credits include the premiere of his first purely orchestral composition by the Nashville Symphony, another premiere of his overture for violin and orchestra, and lastly, his 2020 release of the album Not Our First Goat Rodeo, which frankly is just too fun not to say in this curtain speech. At this time, please enjoy our conversation with Edgar Meyer and Jonathan Morton.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you guys, very gracious of you to do this.
Our pleasure.
I was told that, Edgar, you're the most visited artist they've ever had here in this hall. Most frequent visiting artist, and I'm sure when the check clears, you'll stop being so, but until that happens.
I love being here. I mean, I didn't know that I was that frequent, but that's great.
That's what I was told. So yeah. I'd just like to start out by talking about the nature of your piece we're all going to hear tonight.
Yes.
And is that someone's specific idea, or together you came up with the idea? It's a two-part question. And as you write it, do you collaborate on the process, or do you just present it to Jonathan kind of finished?
Well, you know, I think the origin, you know, was the interaction that I had with the Scottish Ensemble, and playing a piece that we'll play tonight, which was a string quintet that I wrote in the 90s, but doing it with the entire 14 players of the ensemble was a unique experience for me. It really, you know, gave a dimension to that piece that I hadn't seen before. And so in that sense, it gave me very specific ideas of where I wanted to try to go. And then in terms of actually writing it, I pretty much sit in a room and pray.
I won't ask to what gods, but that's, yeah.
I know, but I try lots of stuff and think a lot. And I do collaborative writing sometimes, but this particular piece is not that.
Right.
But it is a piece, you know, written by me with the vision of this ensemble bringing it to life. And in actual fact, even though it's often just first violin, second violin, viola, cello, bass, there are 14 individual parts, and times that it kind of breaks and takes a little bit of advantage of it being more of a chamber situation than, just an orchestral one.
And Jonathan, you've collaborated with a lot of kind of classical music heroes, if you will. And is that a typical procedure for you, or do you actually ever get involved in the process? Would people ever send you drafts, kind of, and you comment and?
Yeah, it varies. Some composers will send sketches and just ask for feedback, or can you play this on the instrument, or it could be technical questions. It varies. Different people write differently. But yeah, Edgar was by no means any different from the kind of range. He just wrote this fantastic piece. One thing that was different about the way he delivered it is it was delivered in different sections. One section came first, and what was wonderful is that he took a lot of time to record, to do an audio version of it, and that was wonderful. So we could all kind of start to get to know the piece by listening to it as well as reading the score. So yeah, every person you work with has different ways of working. Yeah.
And also, I was, running very far behind and had the busiest year, as busy a year as I've ever had. And so I was on the road trying to write this piece. And so I ended up sending sketches to Jonathan, not so much, primarily for the purpose of showing that I actually had some music, even though he hadn't seen any. And
Faith.
trying to give him, the idea that this was doable, even if it was on the edge. Yeah.
Are you sending the music in MIDI format, or are you actually playing it and sending you?
No, I think one final version I did had some bass playing on it. A lot of the time it's just a MIDI mock-up of stuff. Yeah, it just depends. There's, most of it was MIDI, and then there was a little bass playing here and there.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to, before we open up the floor for questions, I'd like to pivot, if I could, and talk about the general shape of landscape of current art music and classical music, and get both of your feedback on, because I noticed tonight where you think we're going, and I noticed tonight in that it's such a great program, it's so eclectic and fulfilling at the same time, because there's Holst and Bach, Gamba Sonata, and new music, Carolyn Shaw, for example. And do you see this kind of welcoming of new music that we haven't had so much in the past generation, kind of opening up now, or how do you read it, where we're going, and I'm talking about as far as things being written in the moment and the audience welcoming that.
Wow, it's quite a big question. I can only really speak of my own experience of programming and presenting music to audiences. I guess my practice has changed over the years as you experiment, you try things out, and some things just connect with an audience and others less so. And a lot of it is to do with context, what comes before it and afterwards, but also how you perform it. The intensity of commitment and preparation that you bring to the performance. So what I've tried to go away from as much as possible over the years is to kind of, there's this kind of, I suppose, standard structure where, there's a concert and there's a new piece in it somewhere, and it sort of sits on a little bit on its own, and so for me the challenge is to integrate any new music into the program so that, when you're experiencing it live, you don't suddenly think, oh, I've gone to some other place, and then we return to where we were. Right. For me, that's more satisfactory. I think for audiences, it's more satisfactory too. And I think with this program, it feels like that, we're doing that, I think. Also because Edgar, as a performer, it's another opportunity to kind of bring things together. So, it's an absolute pleasure to play Bach with Edgar. And then, of course, he plays in his own piece as a soloist, and then he plays his piece as part of the quintet. He just is part of the group. And then we get him to play with us a very short piece by James Macmillan. So he's part of the group. So, it's just trying to just get all those things to thread a little bit.
So throwback to older classical times when the composer would perform and,
Yeah, and it's a little confusing for me because I don't know what's going on everywhere. I mean, once you're 2 months behind on your composing deadline, you're not looking around to see what other people are playing. And I've had a lifetime of, making a new recording with a friend of mine or 2 friends of mine or 3 or 4 friends of mine. And then we take that music and we go out and tour that music. And so I guess in my life there was always a lot of new music. And it wasn't necessarily under classical auspices. I mean, it wasn't. It was probably always in the cracks. And, but presenting new music was, it kind of feels like all I ever did.
Right.
And if it's becoming, if that's becoming more common in other parts of the business, great. I just don't actually know what's going on.
I love that answer. Well, should we open the floor up for?
Great.
I forgot to ask, John, are we going to have a mic or do people just want to talk loudly? Sure. Great. So the floor is open.
I was just remembering, I think the first album of yours I ever bought was called Under the Wire. Do you remember?
That's a Jerry Douglas record.
Jerry Douglas.
Yes. I might have played on it, but we did a series called the Master Series where I did Unfolding, followed by Love of a Lifetime, or maybe that was the third one. I can't remember the second one was Dreams of Flight. And Jerry and I, were very close friends, and we were playing on each other's records, so the chances, I don't remember specifically if I was on Under the Wire. I probably was, not sure.
It's like 1990,
Yeah. There's a picture of one of Jerry's children hanging from a clothesline, yes.
So it's a vivid image when I saw you.
Oh, yeah.
The other thing that intrigued me is when you said the word MIDI. I'm thinking, you're writing with a quill pen and a bottle of paper, and then you realize, you're sitting at the desk.
I do all of those. It is critical for me that the foundation of the writing is off the computer. And I can spend, days or weeks, I don't know about months, but just collecting ideas. And that'll be with a piece of paper, and maybe I'll get on an instrument. I certainly won't get on a computer. And once I feel like I've got enough that, that I'm not just sitting there pushing buttons on a computer, then I'll use the computer as a tool. But, if I start the piece right at the computer, it doesn't go well. You just start doing things that sound good on a computer, and there's nobody driving the ship.
You write and then you hear all the parts.
The computer can help, it can help with all that. I also still, there's a section at the end of the first movement of this new piece where the melody is presented for kind of the last time by the orchestra, and it had been presented with just with a simple bass line that actually didn't even add information that wasn't already in the melody. And I got to that point and I wanted to have a counter line. And I knew that for me, the most effective thing was actually to sit down with a piece of paper and just write the counter line. And it took like 5 minutes. And there we had it. I might have changed 2 notes or might have, but pretty much about what I wrote down. And that's something that I couldn't have done on an instrument or on a computer. Because when I, write a melody on a piece of paper and then write a counter line above or below it, I can just see the holes in the melody. I can see the shapes in the melody, and I can see what would complement, and in a way that even better than I could hear it, or much less type it in on the computer or whatever.
Just to set the record straight, and I may be wrong about this, but your first album, if I'm not mistaken, was as a soloist or a leader. It was with Bella Fleck, and you played My Funny Valentine on it. Am I correct on that? It was from the 80s.
My Funny Valentine was on Love of a Lifetime, or else it was on Dreams of Flight. It was on one of those two. Yeah. And those were my second and third records.
Oh, okay.
And I did it with piano. So Bela was on the records. He's on both of the records.
Okay.
And it's more likely that it was on the third record, but it was, but my first record was actually, with Mark O'Connor and Jerry Douglas and Sam Bush and Bela.
Okay.
And also Kenny Malone played a little bit of percussion on two pieces. So that was the actual beginning of Strength in Numbers.
I see. And that would have been from the 80s.
That was 85.
Right, okay. Just
Possibly 86. No, 85. It came out in 85.
wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Amazing.
Time flies.
I'm glad to be sitting here.
As we are.
Yeah. Here's a question.
Yes.
Yeah, I wonder if you could help us zoom in on the part of the creative process when the music's been delivered. The musicians are rehearsing it under leadership, and when do you have a chance to give feedback and, kind of, can you give us an example of what that interplay looks like?
Jonathan, help me on this.
Well, obviously the rehearsal process is intense because it's time limited and there's a premiere around the corner. So you've got a lot of information to take in and things to have to mesh together very quickly. So there's a lot of feedback from Edgar at that point because it's his piece and he has the best possible concept of it in his imagination. But then, interestingly, with Edgar, this doesn't stop. So I'm sure he won't mind me sharing this, but he's been filming and recording each show as it goes along and reviewing it, and then he'll come to the next rehearsal with notes, having listened to the performance. So it's a continual process, I think, of improvement, which is how it should be. I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't know if Edgar wants to add anything to that.
That sounds good. I don't have an addition at this moment.
Sounds very organic, the process.
It's not unlike pro sports. These guys at this point realize what the game is, and, they watch film. They realize if they're going to, if the other team is watching film and they're not, then their team's going to know a bunch of stuff they don't know. So that's just been, it's kind of well known now, but that's one of the quickest paths to improvement.
I'm thinking, I had some of these albums decades ago, and the fellows that had mentioned that they're familiar with music, and I'm thinking about, in this context, how refined and structured, how much you're controlling the outcome. But you play in a completely different context with improvisational music, right?
Well, this, honestly, this is as comfortable for me as any single context. And there are just a myriad of things you can do with a bunch of highly skilled string players. Strings are, the most kind of vibrant and flexible of all the instruments. And you try to look for chances to kind of introduce like a group think, and you can. I love the possibilities of having entirely written pieces. There's a million things you can do, but you could never do improvising. And even Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't really know where I'm more comfortable. I'm kind of probably a little bit equally comfortable in a pretty free situation and also in a highly structured one. And I really feel like there's places I can go in each that I could never come close to going in the other.
That's a remarkable thing in our highly, specialized world.
Oh, yeah.
Don't you know? I mean, how many people can say that they're comfortable in those worlds? That's fantastic.
Well, I have close friends who are the same. I mean, but that's part of why we're close friends.
Right, right. Yeah. You find each other, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting question. Anyone else want to? Well, I have to ask one as a cellist.
Please.
For your Bach tonight, the Gamba Sonata. Do you approach that from a gamba perspective, same tuning on the bass, as a gamba, or do you actually kind of look at it as, I'm going to hear it the way cellists hear it, modernized, if you will? Do you have a historical take on the piece, in other words?
Well, I think we start from the fact that Bach wrote it originally for two flutes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so that's
there you
so we're free of that discussion.
Cool. Forget my question then.
Because since so Bach envisioned it, first as two flutes in continuo, and then he dropped the octave on one of the flute parts, gave it to the gamba, put the continuo bass line in the left hand, but maybe added a few notes, and then put the other flute in the right hand. And honestly, I find the split in the tessitura is more pleasing than two flutes together. And then I find us having three instruments to play it with instead of just a keyboard and a gamba, in a way, truer to what the piece is. I'm not going to say that we got a better solution than Bach had, but it really is a little bit of best of both.
Do you have a bass continuo tonight or a cello continuo?
Oh, I'm playing the continuo.
Oh, well, gotcha. Okay.
And Allison Lawrence is playing the cello.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
And
So
Jonathan.
she's playing the gamba.
Got it. Yeah.
Parts.
No, in my head, I just envisioned it backwards. Okay.
Yeah, and so Vin, and of course, my instrument is just a big gamba.
Yeah.
So, and
Literally, you all know the bass is not in the violin family, it's in the gamba family. So.
yeah, so it's very, the sounds that naturally come out of a bass, are surprisingly appropriate.
Said one of the world's great bass players. That's great. Yes, sir.
What do you play, Jonathan? Do you have what's your violin?
It's Niccolo Amati. It's quite ancient, so it's from around 1640, which is extraordinary given that it still works and it's pretty old. What's that?
You couldn't find a newer one.
No. No. So Amati is a kind of a pivotal figure in the history of violin making. He kind of survived the Black Plague, which took out a lot of violin makers in Italy around that time. So the knowledge was, really narrowed down to a few people, and he was one of them. And there is some evidence that Stradivarius might have learned some of his craft in the Amati workshop. So yeah, it's an amazing piece of history, and anyway, I was very lucky this instrument kind of found its way into my path. I wasn't really looking for it, and it just happened. It was lovely. So that's my story. What about you, Edgar? Oh, right. Okay, all right. Yeah.
There's something about the instrument that you heard something in it that was
Oh, yeah. Well, also, my wife plays a violin from that period that is probably Amati, but they say could be Guarnerius, like there's a crossover.
Yeah.
It has a very, very high arch.
Yeah.
It's a fabulous instrument. But anyway, I play an instrument that has the label Gabrielli from 1769. It's an instrument my father fell in love with in 1958, maybe 1960. I'm not sure. I was born in 60. And it was the one that my father always wanted to have himself. And it was sold in 1960 for $1,200. So, and basses, they don't go for the prices that violins do. I mean, you talk about an instrument maker often feels like they've, achieved success when they don't have to do basses anymore. 10 times the wood, 1/10 the price. This is the one that I have is extraordinary. And the person who bought it for $1,200 was a man named George Hofer, who was a school teacher like my father, and they were friends. And we would go visit George in Savannah, and it felt like we weren't visiting George. It felt like my dad was just having us come visit the bass. And and George also owned a Galliano, and when I was about 22, 23 years old, by 23, George called my father and said he's ready to sell it. So my father helped me buy it, and I've had it since then. It was not a conscious decision of mine, really. I mean, I was pretty happy with the inexpensive instrument that I had. I could kind of see that this instrument would probably do some things that the one I had didn't. And then my father just kind of pushed me, and so I've actually, the net result is I have 3 basses, and I haven't chosen any of them. They all came in through my father. So I have a lot of other instruments, including a great piano, for instance. I chose those, but the basses just walked in the door. And it is a great instrument. I'm quite lucky to have it.
Would you use this same bass if you were playing with just Jerry Douglas or Peter Rowan, for example? Or would you have more of a bluegrass setup on another bass?
Most of the stuff that I do, like with those guys, is stuff that we've kind of created together. So I've created it around the instrument that I play. So I'm skirting the edge there. Because if we were really going to do like a serious bluegrass thing, I really ought to get a little deeper instrument, especially to deal with the way they like to mic the guitar in the last 30, 40 years, which, kind of takes a lot of room away from the bass, it's unnatural, but that's what started, especially with Tony Rice. And of course, that's, one of the best things that ever happened. But, the situations I play in are all custom. And only since we've been doing this Telluride House Band have I been in a band that had a guitar. I'd usually be in pared down situations without guitar, so there's more room, and I didn't need to be quite as deep. And it is problematic, as great as Brian Sutton is, it's problematic having, me playing the smaller instrument next to guitar. We make it work, but it's a little challenging.
I can see that, yeah. Fascinating. How are we doing, John? Floor is open. Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you guys. I'm really excited about hearing your music tonight. Both of
Thanks,
you.
we're excited to play.
Thanks so much for being here and
Thank
doing
you.
this. Big round of applause for our guests. Oh, I did that, and then there was a question. Yes. I'm sorry.
I was being facetious, really, but at the same time, there's truth in there. You're looking for something and you don't know what you're looking for, and so there's a lot of I can find 10 places in this score that were from when I was either just going to sleep or just awakening, and I would see something that I hadn't seen or hear something that I hadn't heard. And so you're really looking around the corner a lot to see, try to find things that, and like I say, you don't know what you're looking for. That's a bitch. And, but like I say, my own actual process does include just gathering ideas and and I would list them on a piece of paper. They might be, in prose. I might just have, say I want to try this, or I'm curious about this, or I might write down, some musical things in notes. And these days, of course, especially collaborating, the thing we use the most is the voice memo. You got like an idea for a melody or something, you just put it right on there. And I don't do that as much, but it's very effective, and you can even collaborate easily and well without being in the same place. It's not the same as being in the room together, but it's a lot different than 30 years ago. The voice memo is super useful, and it's just a way also just to capture something that, like, you've got it and you're going to lose it, if you don't document it. And so you can document it like that, and then, come back and check and see what it was.
Yeah, that'll be a problem 100 years from now when we want to know people's process, the way we look at Beethoven's, Mozart's notebooks.
Just go to those guys in the federal government collecting our...
Good point.
And
it's all there.
believe me, the professors are going to have that figured out by then.
I think that's a great place to end this. So again, thank you guys so much. Really wonderful. Appreciate it. Thank you guys.